Hello, I'm Katie Malcolm, an instructional consultant at the University of Washington Center for Teaching and Learning, which is a partner of the Waseda University Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology. I'm here today on Zoom with my colleagues from the University of Washington and Waseda University to ask them about what kinds of practice and feedback enhance learning.
Hi, my name is Yusuke from Waseda University. I give my students opportunities to practice important skills and receive feedback by doing a 1-minute presentation in my regular classes and seminar classes. My seminar classes are based on research-based learning. The students in my laboratory often practice 10 minutes presentations. The presentation, question, and answer for their research activities are part of the grade. The students engage in graduation research for about 2 years at Waseda University. That junior students learn not only the knowledge and the skills necessary for 3 hours a week, but also the method of research. The senior students develop applications and evaluate it, or make questionnaires and interview research participants, then collect the data and analyze it. The presentation is only one part of the graduation research process. However, it is an important skill to show and describe their results. In the seminar classes, graduate students and I provide feedback several times, repeatedly from 4 point views. First, in the presentation, it is necessary to present characters, figures, and images effectively. Second, it is necessary to speak clearly and to structure the presentation and argument in a way that is easy to listeners to understand. The third, it is necessary to strictly observe the time. The fourth, interaction and the Q&A responses are important. The students learn not only by themselves, but also from each other's presentations. Also, it is effective to grade the presentations using rubrics. I provide feedback that is most helpful to each student's level of proficiency so that they can effectively incorporate the feedback in their learning. Recently, I had an excellent student who had such a high level of presentation skill that I couldn't comment on anything at first. He said he practiced speaking every day to become a TV announcer, and he is now working at NHK, Japan Broadcasting Services, as announcer.
Hi, my name is Milan Vidakovic from the University of Washington. When I started teaching language classes, one of the first things I learned from my senior colleagues was to scaffold class activities, to create a series of activities that are progressively more difficult, starting from relatively simple ones and then moving on to more complex ones. These class activities are progressively more difficult in more than just one respect. One, they start from tasks with relatively simple content and then move to more difficult ones. For example, vocabulary activities going from words that are commonly used to words that are heard only occasionally, or from activities where students fill in single words to asking and answering questions or writing short paragraphs. Two, they begin as isolated activities, vocabulary practice only, grammar practice only, pronunciation practice only, and then they merge into more complex activities that combine two or more of these aspects. And three, these activities begin by providing feedback that is immediate from the answer sheet or from a student partner to providing feedback that is slightly delayed from the instructor, from myself. The idea here is for students to rely on themselves for as long as they can, and when they reach the point where they need outside help, then they receive feedback from the instructor. The way I taught was guided by what I learned from my senior colleagues, and also because I intuitively felt it was the right way to do it. Now, I also know that research shows that many of those strategies enhance student learning through practice and through feedback. For example, scaffolding activities makes sure that students remain in Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, the optimal level of challenge. beginning with isolated activities rather than diving into complex ones right away, gives students the opportunity to understand what the component parts are of a particular process, which makes it easier for them to gain proficiency in each distinct element before tackling a more complex task. And finally, feedback helps them track how well they're doing in moving toward their goal and what they need to work on to accomplish that goal. I also added a particular twist to the feedback I provided to my students, a twist that turns the feedback I provide into practice opportunity for my students. Whenever a student would say something incorrect and I provided feedback that would remedy their understanding, I would then make sure that the student had the opportunity to actually say aloud the accurate statement to correct themselves. My rule of thumb was to make sure that the last thing that comes out of a student's mouth is always accurate information. The reasoning for this is that if a student says something incorrect and I correct them and then move on to a different student, they feel bad, they feel discouraged, they feel like they have failed in their learning. But if they have the opportunity to correct themselves, to do things right, to reach the intermediate goal of their learning, and to do so in front of everyone, in front of other students, then they gain the confidence in their performance, they have a sense of achievement, and they gain the motivation to keep learning and to keep putting in the effort. These are all practices that I did in a language classroom, but then I also adapted them in other classes that I taught, such as literature and expository writing. There are some small differences in each context, but the logic behind these activities is the same. It is the logic that Ambrose and her colleagues describe in this chapter, namely about practice targeting an appropriate level of challenge and being of sufficient quantity and frequency, and about feedback, providing plenty of it and timing it effectively.
Using effective feedback is key in the undergraduate writing courses that I teach, since students produce a lot of writing in my class. Sometimes they write 10 to 20 page essays, so I don't have time to comment on everything that they write. One strategy I use for this is peer feedback. My students write feedback to one another on their early drafts to help improve their paper significantly before they turn them in for me to read. To make peer feedback successful, I give students clear directions and a rubric to guide their feedback for one another, so that they know what exactly they are giving their peers feedback on. And since giving peer feedback in and of itself can be a new skill for first-year college students, I even give students feedback on their feedback the first time that they do it. So my students will write feedback on their peers' essays using Canvas, our learning management system. That way, I can then skim through the feedback that they write to each other and respond to it there in Canvas. I will point out how helpful or clear their feedback is, as well as where the feedback is not so helpful or not appropriate for this kind of assignment. After getting feedback on their feedback, students know what kinds of responses I expect them to give their peers, and then they can really help one another improve the quality of their essays. When they turn in their revised paper to me, I also ask them to submit a brief reflection describing how they have revised the essay using their peers' feedback. This way, I know that students are not only giving one another helpful feedback, but that they are also reading, reflecting on, and using that feedback thoughtfully. By the time I read a student's paper, it has already gone through a few different iterations, and I can focus my own feedback on helping students develop the depth that would otherwise be missing from an early draft, leading to a stronger final essay.